Hi guys, Speaker should be joining in a minute. I think he was stuck with something. Uh, so he should be joining in 2 or 3 minutes. So let's give him a little bit time. In the meantime, if you guys are new to our portal and this is your first time coming to our events, we have a Discord channel where we post about our upcoming events and certification training events as well. And we have a AZ801 coming up on Monday. So if you want to be joining, you can just join our Discord channel and you can find the link to that registration page there, or I can share it after this event as well. So yeah, just share the Discord link in the chat box. Once again, thank you or hi all, and our speaker CG is here with us, and we will be starting now. And once again, thank you all for joining today's session. And today's topic is discovering the power of Azure Static Web Apps. And we have CG with us, who is MVP in developer technologies, and he'll be taking us through this topic and teaching us how we can use best out of the Azure Static Web Apps. So let us hear from him. Over to you.
Hello, can you hear me, guys?
Yeah,
Yep.
perfect. Yeah.
Okay, sorry, I think I'm having a problem with my camera. If that's okay for you guys, you can see me. But yeah, I think my audio works well.
Yeah.
So yeah, um, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everyone. So first of all, thank you for joining this session. So even though it's weekend, and yeah, we are all interested to learn about Azure, specifically on Azure Static Web Apps. So yeah, before I start, I'll just share my screen. All right. Okay. So, everyone, if something is not clear or something is not um visible on our screen, so feel free to interrupt me on my talk. So yeah, if you have any other questions, so you can leave it on our chat group, or yeah, you can just raise your hand. So if I can answer you directly, or you can just interrupt me in the um on this presentation. But yeah, we I think we also have a Q&A after this session. So yeah, anyway, so as I have said a while ago, our topic for today is Azure Static Web Apps. So the mainly title for my topic is discovering the power of Azure Static Web Apps. So I'm not sure if all of you guys or some of you here in the audiences are familiar with Azure Static Web Apps, but yeah, Azure Static Web App is one of the newest services that is being offered by Azure. And this is mainly used for deploying static web apps at the same time deploying front end or famous front end frameworks in Azure. So yeah, that's what we're going to talk about. So I'm just gonna tackle about the basic or the introduction of Azure Static Web Apps and on how you can deploy it. And at the same time, I will demo some frameworks that I will deploy in my portal. So you can also see on how can I connect it into GitHub and how easy it is to create your own CI/CD on the fly. And for example, you want to do freelance using Azure, so it's really easy for us to deploy using Azure Static Web Apps. Yeah. So okay, so before we proceed to our topic, so I'm CG Villafranca. Unfortunately, you can't see me. I'm having problems with my camera right now. But to give you a background on what's my experience, what currently I'm doing. So I'm a senior developer here in the Netherlands. So currently in Waipun Technologies. Uh, I'm I'm a Filipino MVP, but yeah, I live currently here in in Europe. So it's just around 9:11 a.m. here. So sorry for just the delay. I'm quite confused about the time zone, so still being new. And yeah, a Microsoft MVP for almost 2 years right now. So I focus on developer technologies in Azure. So I just don't teach about Azure, but I also teach about other technologies in Microsoft, specifically in development. So like .NET, uh, RxJS, and GitHub. So yeah, that's what I focus on Microsoft. Excuse me. And yeah, also an Auth0 ambassador and a community lead of Angular Philippines. So um, Angular is one of the major frameworks that uses RxJS. So quite it's not really dependent, but it's quite uh the friend or the best friend of RxJS. So yeah, it's really involved in Microsoft right now. And also, yeah, I'm an author of a book. So this book will be published on November. So it's about Angular, Azure, and Java. So if you want to learn the real full stack with DevOps, so yeah, you that book is really recommended for you to read. Okay. So yeah, I've been into several talks already. If you want to ask me how many talks I've been to, so I cannot answer that because yeah, I've been into many events already, even in local meetups. So yeah, I've been more into local meetups in the Philippines, but yeah, I've been speaking into events in several places already, even in conferences. Right. So yeah, enough of about me. So yeah, let's talk about Azure first. So before we go on to the Azure Static Web App, so what is Azure? So I'm not sure if everyone has already used Azure or they have their own account already, but I just want to introduce you what are the other stuffs or what are the other things that Azure can offer in our development process. So the first one. Sure, it's really a cloud computing platform. So other existing cloud computing platforms are AWS, so the Google platform, and yeah, it actually offers Azure actually offers the same as the other cloud computing platform. So Azure is considered um, actually the three, but I will explain the difference. So mainly Azure is a cloud computing platform. So this is the first one. The main category of Azure is a infrastructure as a service. So why? Because of its cloud computing power. So we're using the servers of Microsoft um to manage our business infrastructure. So it's categorized as infrastructure as a service. But in the underlying structure of Azure, it's also considered as a platform as a service or a PaaS. So why? If someone in the audience or someone you guys have explored Azure already based on the services it's offering, so it offers database, storage management systems, and uh, any other services that will help us in our development process. So that will be considered as platform as a service. So platform as a service, in a nutshell, so this basically helps us. These are the tools that helps us develop products faster. And lastly, Azure is not really considered as software as a service, but it helps us build a SaaS. So, for example, we want to build a POS or any other tools or accounting software. So Azure helps us to build that, or Azure helps us to develop that software as a service. So I consider Azure as a one-stop shop. So any cloud computing platform today that is existing, it's really a one-stop shop because it can really build our business infrastructure. Okay. So services, these are actually just some of the services that Azure offers. If I list all the services that Azure can offer us, so this will actually have more slides. So I cannot place this, but these are just some of the famous services that is being used by Azure. So yeah, Azure offers machine learning. So for the AI users or for the AI developers, so Azure offers that specifically for data modeling. Database hosting, it's also being offered at the same time. It has its own UI, or it has its own management studio. Web hosting. So Azure, before Azure Static Web Apps was born, it already has its Azure Web Apps and storage. So storage also it's being used for web hosting. API functions, so for backend and serverless applications, and the storage itself. So for example, the storage of your files, your images, or specifically a blob storage. So these are just the sample services that Azure offers. So as you can see, I've highlighted the web hosting because we're gonna focus on this part, and Azure Static Web Apps falls on this kind of service. Okay. So yeah, etc. So there are so many Azure services, and personally, I'm not using them all. For example, the machine learning, I've tried it, but not really that complex, and other services that are still present. So I haven't explored it yet. So yeah, if you already have your account and you're curious about the service, so yeah, um mm, you can actually explore it and try it yourself, but also be wary of the credits. So yeah, it offers a really lot or a variety or a wide range of services under the Azure portal. Okay. So yeah, as I have said a while ago, it's considered as a one-stop shop because it really offers many services that we might need to build our own infrastructure. So it's really everything in one platform. Okay. So yeah, the first question that I will ask you is what are some of the common need of developers? So the I think for me personally, I have an experience in freelancing. So one of my common needs is to find a really easy way of how to deploy my web apps, and at the same time it's fast. It's easy to set up the CI/CD, the pipelines, and to integrate into my repository. So this is really a uh critical tool for me to use in terms of developing or applications for clients. Why? Because we don't have that enough time to worry about the setup for the configuration because we need to develop the software itself. So uh, it's really hard for us to worry on the DevOps part or the deployment part. So that's one of the common need of developers, especially for freelancers. So um, that kind of problem. So this is like a joke for the developers. So yeah, when sometimes we really don't want to worry about it. So uh we just say that hey, it's under control, it's fine. But under the hood, our deployment, so it works on local, but when you deploy it, it's not really good. It's burning, you don't, but you're not really don't care anymore. So yeah, we don't want that to happen. We want our deployment to be seamless, to be smooth, and we don't really want to worry about it. We just want to worry about the logic of our code. So yeah, um, that's what Azure Static Web Apps solves. So, but yeah, Azure Static Web Apps, as I have said a while ago, it's um, it's actually kind of new. So it was released last year, May 2021. So it's one of the newest services offered by Azure. But if you want I think you're thinking now that Azure is a cloud platform. So if Azure Static Web Apps was born just last 2021, so what is Azure using in order to deploy apps or in order to host apps in their cloud? So yeah, before Azure Static Web Apps was born, there is what we call the web apps, and the other one is the Azure Blob Storage Static website. So before we knew static web apps, the hero, so there are also other existing deployment or hosting services. So yeah, another question for that one is what is the difference of the three? So I'm not gonna deep dive on what's the difference, but static web apps, it's basically mainly for static web apps. So it's for front end deployment. Um, but it is not just for front-end deployment. So we will know later what are the other features that it can offer compared to the two existing services. But in web apps is mostly used on MVC. So if you want to deploy um, a full blast MVC that is written on Python, on .NET, on Java. So you can use web apps. And for the more complex part that static web apps cannot do, like using virtual machines, so you can also use web apps. So yeah, web apps is actually the standard or the common way of deploying uh uh, your web applications when static web apps was not yet born. And this is actually mainly used for MVC, not just for front end frameworks. Then next is the Azure Blob Storage. So if you remember the traditional way, so for example, we just want to deploy the files in an FTP or a file transfer protocol manner. So that's the Azure Blob Storage. This is not really used anymore. I don't recommend this, guys. Please don't not use this for deploying your applications. It still can be used, but this is a very old way because this is a manual way of doing of deployment. So it's just like copy pasting your file from your local to the cloud. So that's what the Azure Blob Storage. So I'm not recommending it because this cannot be integrated in CI/CD. At the same time, it's very hard to um, integrate with GitHub and Azure DevOps. So um, if you want to deploy, it's either web apps or static web apps. Right. So, as I have said a while ago, Azure Static Web Apps, it's released on May 12, 2021. So it's just around almost 2 years actually. So it's quite still new. So and it's still improving right now. And as I am using the documentation, so it's really improving by Microsoft. So yeah, um, if you are curious already, so what are the use and advantage of Azure Static Web Apps? Excuse me. So Azure Static Web Apps, it's mainly used for hosting your um, static sites. So that's why it's called Static Web Apps. It's mainly used for your um, static web apps. So it's if you are using front-end frameworks, JavaScript frameworks, any JavaScript frameworks, Svelte, Angular, Vue, or whatever, so you can actually deploy that on Azure Static Web Apps. So because if you build all of that frameworks, it's just basically the same. It's still JavaScript. So we're just building it into smaller pieces, so into smaller files. But under the hood, it's still JavaScript, and you can still deploy that into Azure Static Web App. So, um, from what I know, any uh front end frameworks right now, or any single page applications right now, we can already deploy it into Azure Static Web Apps. Every framework is already compatible. So yeah, it can be integrated easily with GitHub Actions and Azure DevOps. So this is one of the major advantages of static web apps. So from before or from the past way, when we try to deploy or we want to use hosting platforms, so it's not that easy or it's not on the fly to configure CI/CD together with that hosting platform. So that's another worry or that's another issue. But in the side of Azure Static Web Apps, so this is really an advantage for for the development process. So instead of adding an additional effort in setting up your GitHub Actions or your pipelines, so it's not a worry anymore as static web apps can be easily integrated. So it will generate its own pipelines. So you'll just have to configure it or you just have to modify it based it on your needs. But it's not that difficult compared to the past way of how we do it. Then yeah, as I have said, it supports the latest front-end framework for deployment. So yay for that. So most of us were already using this frameworks already. So this Angular, React, and Vue. And other frameworks, if you're not using these three, so like Svelte or Aurelia JS and Backbone JS or other existing JavaScript frameworks, since there's really many JavaScript, but it's actually really compatible now with Azure Static Web Apps. So yeah, that's really also a major advantage for using static web apps. Okay, then uh, the next one. This is actually an advantage also. Um, it provides a VS Code extension for uh the Azure itself, actually, not just the Azure Static Web Apps. It has a VS Code extension that you can install. So in this is an advantage for us because we don't have to switch to the portal itself just uh your to create your new resource, at the same time to check the or monitor your status of build. So we have a VS Code extension that we can also see what is happening on the status of the deployment. At the same time, we can also manage our resources inside the VS Code. So this is really a useful tool or a useful extension for developers uh, to check all of the status in just one window. Okay. Then lastly, yeah, it offers free SSL certificate. So if you want to deploy your web application on static web apps, so it's automatically in HTTPS. So you don't have to sign an SSL or buy an SSL certificate. Okay. So yeah, what does really happen when we use Azure Static Web Apps? Um, It's really simple. So this is quite the same. So this is the flow that we usually do or we usually implement in the business or in the actual world. So yeah, we just have some code changes. That code changes will be pushed into GitHub, and the GitHub actions will be triggered. Or if you are using Azure DevOps, so the Azure pipelines under the Azure DevOps will be triggered. Then if the build is finished, then it will go to the Azure Static Web Apps. So your build, sure, it will produce basic HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So it will be placed into the Azure Static Web Apps. Then if it uses an Azure Functions, it has its API folder, or it has its own functions that will call for the backend. So it's actually also compatible. It can be easily integrated with Azure Functions. So yeah, it will also be deployed in the Azure portal. So basically, that's the flow. So it's complete. So you have your deployment, you have your CI/CD, then you have your repository. So once the once your changes are being pushed or being approved in your repository, so GitHub Actions and Azure Static Web Apps will do all the work for you for the deployment. Right. So yeah, if you want to explore, if you want to start for using Azure Static Web Apps, so the prerequisites are Azure account. Sure, sure you need the Azure account for that one. So if you want to ask me if Azure account has a fee or something, or has a subscription, so Azure, for creating an Azure, it's just like AWS. So we need some credits for us to try the services. But for example, if you are a student, so the Microsoft offers free credits for students. But I am not sure right now if for professionals, if they are offering free credits for the Azure portal. But yeah, I can also update you on that one if they have free credits that they can offer for Azure. But I know if you are if I'm not mistaken, if you are a first time user for Azure, so you will have also a free 12-month trial, or basically a 1-year trial for exploring the services of Azure. Um, so if you're a first time user, so grab that opportunity so to explore all the services, not just the Azure Static Web Apps. Then yeah, next, the GitHub account. So we will use the GitHub account for as a repository, and to use the GitHub Actions for the CI/CD of our code. Then yeah, VS Code for our editor. Then later on, I will demo you on how to use the VS Code extensions. So the Azure's tools and other extension pack that is being used by the Azure tools. So I will also demo you on how to deploy the front-end frameworks in the Azure portal and GitHub. Okay. So yeah, if you want to visit the Azure portal, so just go to portal.azure.com. So I will show you. Excuse me. Hmm, okay, right. So portal.azure.com. So if you visit this with an account, so you will likely see the dashboard itself. So, but if you don't have any account yet, you will see their main page. Then you just have to sign up, and yeah, you will actually get a 12-month or a 1-year trial just for you to explore all of the services. Then after you have signed up or created your account with Azure, so you will see their dashboard and all of the services. So the first thing you will see in Azure is this one, so the dashboard and all of the resources that you have created at the same time, the services that is being offered by Azure. So yeah, at first it's kind of confusing because it really offers quite a lot. But right now, we will focus on the Azure Static Web Apps. So for this one, these are actually the services that I usually use. So that's why this is um, the one appearing on my screen. But I'll just show you some of the services. So you can see that there are really many services. There are tons of services in Azure. So don't ask me what's the use of the other services, because even though I'm under the Microsoft MVP, I don't know all of this one. But yeah, I focus on the developer services, or the development technology side. So yeah, that's if you want to explore more of the services, you can try it out. Yeah, but just yeah, be careful on the credits, because um some services they're being charged uh on on the time on being used. So just be careful on that one, especially on the APIs. So let's try to Okay, so yeah, let's go back on the Azure Static Web Apps. So the first thing we're going to do is create a static web app services. So let's create a resource. So this, you can actually click that. So for example, it's your first time using the static web apps. Just imagine that this is not yet here. So you can just actually uh, search that service. Okay, so this one, so the static web apps. Um, I have already several static web apps, but I will create one, right? Okay. So create static web app. So this is just the page on how you will create your static web app. So, okay, this is the Azure portal. So we will continue on this later. So right now, I'm gonna demo on deploying an Angular application on the static web app in GitHub. So I'm not sure if everybody is familiar on how to deploy or on how to initialize an Angular application, but I'll just show you on how. Okay, right. So okay, so in this demo, guys, this is an Angular application. So the first thing I will do is I will create an Angular app. Then I will place it on my GitHub repository, and I will integrate the GitHub repository to the Azure Static Web Apps. So that's our goal. So my goal is uh for uh to deploy my Angular application externally. So all of you can access the Angular app. So basically the world can access the Angular application in the static web apps. So I will just create one. Let's create a folder like Java. Okay, right. So I'll create a new Angular application. So I'm not gonna code here. I'll just have to scaffold the app. So let's just have some basic configuration for Angular. So yeah, after I've after I've configured the Angular, so this will just take around 3 minutes. So while we're waiting for that one, so I'm not sure, but I think all of you guys already have your uh GitHub account. So let's go to GitHub. So let's create a new repository for this one. So let's just name it Angular Java, right? Then I'll make it public. So for you guys, you can also pull this repository. So you can actually use this if you don't want to generate your Angular application. Uh, you can just pull this, just do the npm install, then try to deploy it on your own Azure portal. So yeah, I have my own repository. Mhm. So let's just wait. Okay, right. So let's just wait for the Angular application uh to initialize. Right. Okay. So yeah, I think while we're waiting, I can also explain this. This will take a while. So yeah, going back to the Azure portal. So this is actually just the first way on how we can create or how we can deploy our apps using Azure Static Web Apps. Later on, I will also show you another way on how to deploy it without using the Azure portal itself. So by just using the VS Code. So, but this one I'm using the browser, so you can see I'm switching tabs from VS Code to the Azure portal, but later on I will just use VS Code for deployment. So yeah, this is because of the internet, I think. So, but yeah, anyways. So yeah, in create static web app. So this is actually just a simple configuration. So there's not much question. So it will just ask you what subscription that you're going to use. So if you have several subscriptions that you're using for Azure portal. So subscription, by the way, it's just the payment terms. So for example, you have paid for a enterprise plan. So you're gonna use that um for paying the service itself. So you're basically assigning the payment for a specific service. Then next is the resource group. So resource group from the word itself, it's like the a team of resources or a group of resources. So how do we usually group resources? First one, it's based on its functions. Second, it's in region. So for example, we have many projects. So one project, so their services or the services being used in that specific project, um, you should put it in a single resource since they are related to each other. So that's a resource group. So for example, this one, I want to create a new resource. So actually, I have several resources, but for this demo, I want to create one. I want all of the apps that I will, or all of the services that I will create will be placed into one resource. So I will call this resource as Java resource. Okay. Then just name your static web apps. So let's try Java Angular. So the hosting plan, actually, that's the good part. So we want really a free hosting plan. So we can see here that we can just use hobby or personal projects. So what's actually the difference? So this is the difference. So it dictates your bandwidth. So the domain storage. So basically, standard has a lot of storage. Uh, the bandwidth, it's faster, so it can handle more traffic compared to the free plan. But right now, we're just going to use free. But free is also a good start or a good use for your website, for your portfolio. So it's really a good plan for already. So if you really don't need a large bandwidth for your web applications. So I'll just use free for this one. So uh, next is the region. So the region is where we want to place our service. So for example, our clients or our customers, we want to target in the Europe side. So for example, yeah, I'm here in the Europe. So the closest part is West Europe. So I will choose the West Europe for this one. And the deployment details. So we're gonna use GitHub for this one. So uh, as I have said a while ago, one of the major advantages of static web apps is that it is can be easily integrated with GitHub. So since GitHub is now being owned by Microsoft, so it's also now integrated by this one. So we can specify here in the configuration that we want our repository to be coming from GitHub itself. So at the first time you will just have to allow your um your account to be connected on this Azure Static Web App. So um GitHub can authorize Azure to access all of your repository. So if you have successfully configured that, so you can see here that you will have your username. Then after that one, excuse me, you can also access all of your organization. So the organization, your user account, and all of your other organizations. Then after that, clicking your organization, so you can also access all of the repositories under your GitHub. So yeah, in this demo, our goal is to access this repository. So, but before we access that one, so yeah, we are right on time. So our Angular application is now initialized. So let's open that one. Okay, let's open this. Right, right. So this is our Angular application. So we're not gonna do anything much about it. We just want to deploy it. So this is actually runnable already. It has its own placeholder. So what we're going to do is we just want to add the origin. Let's copy. So let's add this code in our repository. Okay, right. So right now, we have already added our code in our repository. So you can see that this is uh the code or the scaffold code that we have created a while ago. Uh we have built a while ago. So it's now on our GitHub. So right now, we want Angular Java to be connected to the Azure Static Web Apps. Right. So let's go back on this um window. So on the Azure portal. So let's just load it again. So let's search for our repository. So we can see that static web apps is accessing our GitHub repository. So it can access our um, GitHub repo. So in this case, let's just say for demo purposes, we want this to be the production hosting or the production server. So our branch, we want it to connect to our master, right? So after selecting your branch, so we will have some additional details. So the build details, this is actually the critical part. So if you have some issues or if you have some errors in your configuration, so your application might not work. So this will define on where Azure Static Web Apps will find the root or the entrance on your project. So the build presets, actually this will define on the framework that you are currently using. So this is also one of the advantage of Azure Static Web Apps because it can now it will now ask you on what is the framework that you are using. So in our case, we are using Angular. Then for our application, so you don't have to change it since our application, our base URL is slash. On the output location, so this is the one of the critical parts. So we can see that the example is this slash app underscore name. So this is actually the way on how Angular builds its application. So for example, you want to build your Angular, so we will do it locally. So build means we are building the files that is ready for deployment. Mhm. So what I'm doing here is I'm just showing you on how Angular builds files and uh how how it places the polyfills, the main or the uglified files into a folder. So let's just wait for this one. So this will just take like a minute or less. Okay. So I have built the Angular application. So this what will usually happens when we deploy it on Azure Static Web Apps. So Azure Static Web Apps, it will trigger the npm run build command for Angular. Then Angular will create a folder. So the folder is named dist. So it's a short word for distribution. Then under that dist, so it has a folder named Angular dash Java. So that's the project name. So what we're going to do is we're gonna place this value in the output location. So it's this slash angular dash style. So this is the most important configuration value such that this will actually I let Azure Static Web Apps identify where to find the files that it will host. So yeah, we are now done for uh the configuration of Azure Static Web Apps. So if another thing, if you want to ask is the format of the output location the same with other frameworks? So it's not, but in the documentation of Azure, they have already displayed on what are the different artifact location for different frameworks. So you can actually see it here in the list. So for example, in Angular, so that's the value for app artifact location. So in other other frameworks like Astro or Aurelia, they're also using this, but they're not gonna specify the project name. And in Blazor and framework, even Flutter, they're also compatible right now. So it's build slash web. Then JavaScript, it's slash, but it depends on your structure. But usually it's just slash. And other several frameworks or JavaScript frameworks. So yeah, they have already listed down on the format of the app artifact location. So yeah. So anyways, let's go to the creation of the Azure Static Web Apps. So let's create now. And yeah, after reviewing, let's create the static web apps. Yeah. So the next thing we'll do here is we'll just have to wait for our deployment to complete. So um while waiting for that one, let's go back to our GitHub. So let's refresh. So you can see that a while ago, I have committed an initial push for placing my Angular code in the repository. But after I've implemented or after I've integrated Azure Static Web Apps to the GitHub, so you can see that I have another commit. So what does that commit uh, do? So that commit, it added a workflow. So we have already our actions. So the GitHub workflow, this is already automatically generated by the Azure Static Web Apps. So we already have our own pipelines. So this is just a basic pipelines for building into Azure Static Web Apps. But if you have other requirements, so you can just add it in the pipelines. But right now, it's building for the Azure Static Web Apps. So we'll just have to wait for this to build. So let's go back to the portal. So let's go to the resource. So this is the resource itself. So this is the service, the Scava Angular. So if you want, to check if your Angular application is deployed successfully, so this is the link itself. But let's wait for it to build. So since it's not yet built, we can just check that our Azure Static Web App is live and waiting for our content. Right now, we don't have the content yet, but once this is built, so you can see that my Angular application will be deployed. So let's just wait for around, I guess this will take around 3 minutes, I guess. Okay. So since we just have short period of time, oh there, it's now deployed. So if you refresh this website, so you can see now that our Angular application is deployed. So uh if you try to visit this URL, so you can actually access it externally. So it's now running on Azure Static Web Apps. So I just paste it on the chat group. Meeting chat is muted by the way. So I'll paste it later. But if you want to visit that, so um that's already uh accessed externally. So it's already available in the internet. So that's it. That's how you use Azure Static Web Apps in terms of deploying your front end framework. So it's a really um a short configuration, but as you can see that it also configured its own GitHub action at the same time it can deploy your front end frameworks on the fly. So just a last short demo. So a while ago, I've created the Azure Static Web Apps through the portal, but other way on we can do that is we can directly create our Azure Static Web Apps on the VS Code. So how can we do that? So we can do that by installing the Azure Tool extension. So on your VS Code, excuse me, you can actually install Azure Tools. So Azure Tools, once you install this, this is not yet complete. So you should also install several extension packs. So in my case, I have installed several extension packs. So I have installed this one. I have installed the Azure App Service, the Azure Storage, and even the Azure Static Web Apps. So after installing that extension in the VS Code, so you will see an um, additional option on your left panel. So that's the Azure. Excuse me. So you can see that if you remember on my Azure portal, you can also see your subscription. So my Visual Studio Enterprise subscription is appearing here. Um, I've already connected my account, so this is also easy. Once if you will attempt to connect your account in VS Code, it will just prompt a login and a password authentication. So you'll just have to use your Azure account, and that's it. Your VS Code is connected to the Azure portal. Then you will see all of your resources. Then after that, in VS Code, you can also see the different services. So these are just the limited services that I've installed because these are just extension. So these are the things that currently using. So I also have a static web apps here. So once you've um, click the static web apps. So you will see all of the available static web apps on the cloud. So specifically on my portal. So you can also see my Java Angular resources. So this is the Azure Static Web Apps I've deployed a while ago. So I can also see its status in the VS Code. At the same time, what's the status of the CI/CD or the build of my static web app. So we can see here that all of the jobs, all of the steps has been successful inside the VS Code. So this is really an efficient way on you for you to deploy at the same time to monitor what is happening on your deployment. Then at the same time, you can also create your own static web apps directly in VS Code. So it's actually the same step. You just have to select your subscription. Okay, I just have to commit the, sorry about that. Let's commit this. Right. So yeah, we need to commit first. So we need for us to continue. So let's go back again. Yep. Then yeah, let's create the Visual Studio, a static web app under my Visual Studio. So let's create another static web app. Then you can see that it's almost the same questions. So we're just using VS Code for creating our static web app. So we're just also going to select our region. Then the same one, the framework that we are using. Then the location of the application. So this is um, what we have created a while ago. So we're going to place here the dist, example, the Angular Java. Oops. Oh, sorry. That's my mistake. This should be just the slash. And this is the Angular Java. Okay. And that's it. So you can see that we are also creating the Azure Static Web Apps here in just our VS Code. And yeah, and it's now done. So we can also view the resource here in our VS Code. But to verify, let's go to our Azure portal. So let's find the resource that we have created. Right. So you can also see, so I'm not lying. So in under my VS Code, I've also created my Azure Static Web App. So you can see here that my Azure Static Web Apps is already here in Azure Portal. So in this one, then if you click on this, so this will not um, project our Angular because I have not connected it on our GitHub. So you can see that we can also create our Azure Static Web Apps directly on the VS Code. Right. So that's it, I guess, for my demo. So that's one of the ways. That's two ways actually for using Azure Static Web Apps with GitHub. But there are other ways on deploying Azure Static Web Apps if you don't want to use GitHub. You can also integrate it with other platforms like GitLab, Azure DevOps, and other repositories that you like. You just have you just need to implement some tokens, but it's also easy for us to integrate Azure Static Web Apps even on different platforms. So yeah, um, that's about it for my demo and my presentation. So I hope you guys learned a lot about Azure Static Web Apps and Azure Static Web Apps can offers a lot more features, but this is just a basic and an introduction. And yeah, we can explore it on the Azure itself, and it's a really powerful application, especially if you want to deploy uh your applications on the fly. So yeah, thank you guys for listening for this short talk. So if you want to visit or if you want to pull the code that I have pushed a while ago. So it's under github.com/cgv13. And I also have my own website, cgvillafranca.com. So I also have my tutorials uh, there. And yeah, you're free to get all the codes in my repository. So that's for tutorial purposes. So yeah, once again, thank you guys for joining this session, and I hope you really learned a lot about Azure Static Web Apps, and also I hope you create your web applications using Azure Static Web Apps. And yeah, as Sheldon says, Bazinga. Thank you guys.
Thank you, CG, for the session
Yep.
and
Thank you.
giving your time for the session. And I hope you guys learned a lot from the session. And we'll be following up with recording, and there will be the some resources for the event as well. Thank you all. Have a good day.
Thank you guys.